Just when Tana Mongeau thought she could finally escape her messy past and rebrand into this clean, brand-safe influencer, the ghost of Tanacon has literally risen from the dead to destroy everything she's been working toward. Michael Weiss, the guy who became the internet's most hated event organizer after the 2018 Tanacon disaster, has suddenly returned to social media with a vengeance, and he's spilling tea that could completely derail Tana's carefully crafted new image. While she's been busy ending her canceled podcast with Brooke Schofield, securing major brand deals with Tarte, and trying to distance herself from drama, this man has been plotting his comeback story, and it's absolutely wild. The timing couldn't be worse for Tana, who's been desperately trying to shed her reputation for chaos and controversy, especially with her recent collaborations with Trisha Paytas and her attempts to maintain healthier relationships in the influencer space. If you're here for the absolute chaos that's about to unfold, hit that subscribe button, because trust me, you're going to need a front row seat for this train wreck, and I promise the drama only gets juicier from here.
Let's dive into what's really been happening behind the scenes with Tana's so-called transformation. For the past year, she's been in what she calls her brand safe era, which is basically influencer speak for, I'm tired of being canceled every other week and I want to make some real money. The most obvious sign of this shift has been her decision to end the Canceled podcast, the show that literally built her current empire alongside Brooke Schofield. Now, if you've been following Tana for years, you know that Canceled wasn't just a podcast for her. It was her lifeline back to relevance after various scandals and controversies nearly destroyed her career multiple times. But here's where it gets interesting. In recent interviews, particularly with Trisha Paytas, Tana has been surprisingly honest about why she's really ending the show. She admits that having Canceled come to an end has actually allowed her and Brooke to be real friends again, without the pressure of having to manufacture drama for content every single week. Think about how exhausting that must have been, constantly having to find new controversies to dissect, new people to drag, new drama to manufacture just to keep the audience engaged. Tana described their relationship as being trauma-bonded for life, which honestly explains so much about the dynamic we've been watching play out on screen for years.
The really telling part is when Tana talks about how they've already started to just be normal friends, doing regular friend things without the podcast pressure hanging over them. She even mentions that Brooke is moving closer to her, and she's genuinely happy about it, which is a far cry from the manufactured friendship drama we've seen play out in past episodes. But here's what's really fascinating about this whole situation. Tana admits that if someone had told them they would feel this positive about ending the show, neither of them would have believed it at the time. The financial aspect of this decision can't be ignored, though. Canceled has been a massive source of income for both hosts, and walking away from that kind of guaranteed revenue stream is terrifying for anyone, but especially for someone like Tana, whose income has always been unpredictable. She's been brutally honest about how fear has always been her biggest motivator, and you can see that playing out in real time with this decision. The way she describes it, ending Canceled feels like jumping into the ocean and having to swim, which perfectly captures the anxiety of leaving behind something comfortable and profitable for the unknown. This is where the Tarte collaboration becomes so much more significant than just another influencer brand deal. Tana has openly admitted that she threw herself into this project specifically to distract herself from the fear and anxiety of ending Canceled. She's talked about how she builds her schedule up to insane levels to avoid sitting with uncomfortable emotions, and the Tarte collab was the perfect distraction. The fact that it launched not just on Tarte's website, but also at Ulta, shows just how legitimate this brand partnership was, and how much effort Tana put into making sure it succeeded. But once the Tarte launch was over and she didn't have that distraction anymore, all those fears about ending Canceled came rushing back, and she admits she kind of spiraled about it. This is classic Tana behavior, if we're being honest. She's always been someone who uses work and chaos to avoid dealing with deeper emotional issues, so the fact that she's at least acknowledging this pattern shows some level of self-awareness that we haven't always seen from her in the past. The most interesting part of this whole rebrand is how Tana talks about feeling uncomfortable with leaving something on a high note.
She says it goes against who she is internally because historically, she's someone who burns bridges and leaves situations in chaos. The fact that she's trying to end Canceled gracefully while maintaining her friendship with Brooke represents a level of emotional maturity that honestly surprised a lot of people who have been following her career. Now, while Tana has been working on this whole transformation, fans have been speculating about what this means for both hosts' futures, but particularly for Brooke. The reality is that while Tana has multiple income streams and has been building her brand for years, Canceled is really what put Brooke on the map in terms of mainstream influencer culture. Yes, she had her own social media following before the podcast, but Canceled is what turned her into a household name in the online drama community. Some fans have pointed out that if Tana is feeling anxious about losing the income from Canceled, imagine how Brooke must be feeling, since the podcast represents an even larger percentage of her overall brand and income. This power dynamic has always existed between them, but it's becoming more obvious as they transition away from the show. Tana has her music, her individual brand partnerships, her OnlyFans, her merch, and multiple other revenue streams. Brooke, while successful, doesn't have that same level of diversification yet.
But both hosts seem committed to making this transition work. And there's something really refreshing about seeing two influencers actually prioritize their mental health and friendship over maximum profit potential. In an industry where most people would milk a successful show until it completely destroys their relationship, Tana and Brooke are choosing to end things while they can still stand each other, which is honestly revolutionary in the influencer world. Before we dive into the absolute chaos that Michael Weiss is bringing back into Tana's life, smash that subscribe button if you're enjoying this deep dive, because apparently old drama never really dies. It just hibernates until the worst possible moment to resurface. Just as Tana thought she was successfully distancing herself from her chaotic past, Michael Weiss has emerged from whatever digital cave he's been hiding in for the past few years, and he's bringing all the Tanacon trauma with him. For anyone who wasn't chronically online in 2018, let me paint you a picture of what Tanacon was, because understanding this disaster is crucial to grasping why Michael's return is so potentially devastating for Tana's rebrand.
Tanacon was supposed to be Tana's middle finger to VidCon. She was 19, feeling disrespected by the official convention for not giving her a featured creator badge despite having millions of followers, so she decided to create her own event. The concept was actually brilliant in theory. A free or low-cost convention run by creators for fans, promising short lines, guaranteed meet and greets, and gift bags worth over $1,000. She scheduled it for the same weekend as VidCon in a hotel in Anaheim, positioning it as the cooler, more accessible alternative. Michael Weiss, who was 21 at the time, was the CEO of Good Times Entertainment, a company that managed influencers and organized events. He was supposed to handle all the logistics, the venue booking, the ticketing, the crowd management, basically everything that would determine whether this event succeeded or became a complete disaster. And let's just say, disaster doesn't even begin to cover what actually happened. The execution was so catastrophically bad that it's honestly impressive in its complete failure. Thousands of people showed up, many with free tickets, to a venue that could safely accommodate maybe a few thousand at most. We're talking about lines that stretched outside in brutal California heat, people waiting for hours with no water, no shade, no information about what was happening. Fans were literally getting sunburned, passing out, requiring medical attention, all while trying to see their favorite creators. The people who actually managed to get inside found essentially nothing. There was barely any programming, the promised activities didn't exist, and those legendary gift bags that were supposed to be worth over $1,000, they contained stickers and condoms. Stickers and condoms. The whole thing was shut down on the first day, and it immediately became one of the most notorious failures in YouTube history. The aftermath was where things got really messy between Tana and Michael. Both of them started pointing fingers immediately. Michael claimed that Tana's team had oversold tickets and underestimated attendance, basically saying the numbers got out of control and overwhelmed their capacity. Tana argued that she had trusted Michael's company to handle the logistics professionally and that they had completely failed her and everyone who attended.
This is where Shane Dawson enters the story, and honestly, his involvement probably saved Tana's entire career. Shane created a multi-part documentary series investigating what went wrong with Tanacon, and the way he framed the story completely shifted public perception. Instead of seeing Tana as the person responsible for this disaster, audiences started seeing her as someone who had been taken advantage of by Michael and his company. In Shane's documentary, Tana comes across as genuinely remorseful and devastated by how everything turned out. She's literally in tears talking about how the event wasn't what she wanted, how she felt terrible about what fans experienced, and how she had trusted other people to handle aspects of the event that she wasn't qualified to manage herself. The narrative that emerged was that Tana was a young, naive creator who got in over her head and was manipulated by more experienced business people.
Michael, on the other hand, came across terribly in the documentary. He seemed defensive, unable to take responsibility, and many viewers felt like he was trying to shift all the blame onto Tana and her team. The interview footage of him made him look like the villain of the story, someone who had taken advantage of a young creator's trust and then tried to throw her under the bus when everything went wrong. This narrative completely destroyed Michael's reputation in the influencer space. While Tana was able to bounce back and eventually rebuild her career, Michael became known as the Tanacon guy, or the guy on the Segway, because he was literally riding around the event on a Segway while everything was falling apart around him. Every time he tried to resurface in the influencer world, people would bring up Tanacon, and he could never escape the association with that disaster. For years, Michael essentially disappeared from public view. He lost his business, his clients, his reputation, everything. While Tana went on to build the canceled podcast, secure brand deals, grow her audience, and make millions of dollars, Michael was dealing with the complete destruction of his professional life and, according to his recent posts, his mental health.
Which brings us to 2024. And Michael's decision to break his silence in the most dramatic way possible. He's been posting videos on TikTok talking about how Tanacon ruined his life, giving his side of the story, and making some pretty serious accusations against Tana. The timing is absolutely brutal for her because just as she's trying to establish herself as a more mature, brand-safe creator, here comes this blast from the past, threatening to drag her back into the messiest chapter of her career. In his recent videos, Michael talks about being diagnosed with PTSD after Tanacon, becoming severely depressed, losing his house, his car, his friends, his business, and filing for bankruptcy. He describes years of addiction and what he calls spiraling into darkness, and claims that he almost ended his own life because of the fallout from the event. The way he tells it, the internet basically told him he wasn't worthy of being alive, and he internalized that message to a dangerous degree. But here's where his story gets controversial. Michael claims that he expected Tana to eventually try to make things right or give him some reprieve from the constant online harassment, but she never did. He suggests that her silence and her continued success while he was suffering made everything worse for him. He's essentially arguing that while she was able to rebuild her career and profit from the Tanacon story, he was left to deal with all the consequences alone.
The most damaging part of his narrative is his claim that Tana threw him under the bus and then monetized off of it immensely. He's basically saying that she used him as a scapegoat for the disaster, allowed him to take all the blame, and then built her subsequent success partly on the sympathy she received from being seen as his victim. If this version of events gains traction, it could seriously damage the reputation she's been working so hard to rehabilitate. Michael frames his return to social media as part of his healing process. He talks about needing to share his trauma in order to release it, referencing some kind of esoteric teaching about trauma needing to be witnessed by 5 people before it can be healed. Since social media reaches way more than 5 people, he sees posting about his experience as therapeutic. But the timing and content of these posts suggest there might be more to it than just personal healing. The internet's response to Michael's comeback has been mixed, but it's definitely not the vindication he was probably hoping for. A lot of people are pointing out that while they feel bad about what he went through personally, that doesn't change the fact that Tanacon was poorly organized and put people in actual danger. Comments on his videos are saying things like, "Your actions put people in real danger. You didn't just let people down. Apology not accepted."
Other people are encouraging him to focus more on accountability rather than positioning himself as the primary victim of the situation. They're saying that while Tana may have received backlash and shifted blame onto him, that happened because ultimately he was responsible for the logistics that failed so spectacularly. Some comments acknowledge that he was young and took on something he couldn't handle, but they want to see more specific language around accountability before they're willing to consider any kind of redemption arc. The most interesting dynamic here is how this is playing out while Tana is in her brand-safe era and actively trying to avoid drama. Multiple people have pointed out that if this was happening while Canceled was still in full swing, Tana would have had a field day with Michael's return. She would have dedicated entire episodes to responding to his claims, probably brought on guests to support her version of events, and turned the whole thing into content that would have driven massive engagement. But that version of Tana is exactly what she's trying to move away from. Responding to Michael's allegations in the way that old Tana would have responded would completely undermine everything she's been working toward in terms of rebranding herself as more mature and drama-free. So she's essentially trapped. She can't defend herself without proving that she hasn't actually changed, but staying silent allows Michael's narrative to potentially gain traction and damage the reputation she's been rebuilding.
The broader implications of this situation are fascinating from a social media perspective. We're watching someone try to reinvent themselves and escape their past, while simultaneously watching that past literally refuse to stay buried. Michael's return raises questions about accountability, forgiveness, second chances, and whether people should be able to move on from mistakes they made when they were young. It also highlights the weird power dynamics in influencer culture, where the ability to control narrative often determines who survives scandals and who doesn't. Tana had Shane Dawson's platform and storytelling skills working in her favor, while Michael had to deal with the consequences largely alone. Now he's trying to reclaim some control over his own story, but he's doing it at a time when Tana has more power and influence than ever before. The psychological aspect of this whole situation is pretty intense when you really think about it. Michael spent years watching Tana rebuild her career while he dealt with the aftermath of their shared disaster in isolation. From his perspective, she got to move on and profit while he was left holding all the blame and dealing with all the consequences. That kind of resentment and feeling of injustice can definitely fester over time, and it's not surprising that he would eventually want to tell his side of the story.
But the way he's choosing to do it, through dramatic TikTok videos timed to coincide with Tana's rebranding efforts, suggests this might be about more than just healing and accountability. There's definitely an element of wanting to disrupt her success, whether he admits that consciously or not. And honestly, from a purely strategic standpoint, now is probably the most effective time for him to speak up, because it creates maximum contrast with the image she's trying to project. The fact that people in the comments are already speculating about whether he's clout chasing shows that his motivations are definitely being questioned. Some people believe he's genuinely trying to heal and process his trauma, while others think he's using his mental health struggles to gain sympathy and relevance. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Trauma and opportunism aren't mutually exclusive, and it's possible for someone to be genuinely struggling while also being strategic about how they share that struggle. What's really wild about this whole situation is how it perfectly illustrates the long-term consequences of internet drama. Most online controversies feel like they have a shelf life. They blow up, dominate conversation for a while, and then fade into internet history.
But Tanacon was such a spectacular disaster with such real-world consequences for the people involved that it's apparently never really going away. It's like a digital scar that keeps reopening just when everyone thinks it's healed.
For Tana, this has to be incredibly frustrating. She's clearly put a lot of work into growing and changing as a person, and she's been making real efforts to be more responsible and less chaotic. The Ended Cancel podcast, the focus on healthier relationships, the legitimate brand partnerships, these all represent genuine progress. But having Michael resurface with these allegations threatens to drag her back into the exact type of drama she's been trying to escape. And here's the thing. Even if Michael's version of events isn't completely accurate, even if he is being somewhat opportunistic with his timing, that doesn't mean his pain isn't real. The internet can be absolutely brutal to people who become associated with major failures or scandals, and the psychological toll of that kind of sustained negativity can be devastating. Whether or not he bears primary responsibility for Tanacon, the years of harassment and blame he experienced were probably genuinely traumatic.
This creates a really complex situation where there might not be a clear villain or victim. Maybe Tana was naive and made poor decisions, but also got taken advantage of by people who should have known better. Maybe Michael was in over his head and made mistakes, but also became a convenient scapegoat for a disaster that had multiple contributing factors. Maybe they both suffered consequences, just in different ways and to different degrees. The challenge now is that they're both trying to control the narrative years after the fact, when people's memories have faded and been shaped by documentaries and social media posts rather than direct experience. Michael is presenting himself as the real victim who never got justice, while Tana has been positioning herself as someone who learned from her mistakes and grew as a person. Both of these narratives can't be completely true, but elements of both might be valid.
What's absolutely certain is that this situation is about to get a lot more complicated. Michael has clearly decided that staying silent hasn't worked for him, and he seems committed to sharing his version of events regardless of how it affects Tana's current projects. Meanwhile, Tana is in a position where any response risks undermining her brand-safe era, but no response might allow damaging narratives to take hold. The internet loves a comeback story, but it also loves to see people get their comeuppance. Michael's framing himself as someone who hit rock bottom and is now rebuilding, which usually generates sympathy. But he's also directly challenging someone who has successfully rehabilitated her own image, which could backfire if people see it as him trying to tear down her progress out of jealousy or spite. One thing that's really interesting is how this highlights the different ways people process and move on from shared trauma or difficult experiences. Tana seems to have dealt with Tanacon by acknowledging it was a mistake, learning from it, and then focusing on building something better. Michael appears to have internalized the blame and shame to a degree that prevented him from moving forward, and now he's trying to externalize some of that pain by sharing his story publicly.
Neither approach is necessarily right or wrong, but they're definitely incompatible when one person's healing process involves revisiting events that the other person has worked hard to move past. This is probably going to get messier before it gets resolved because both of them have legitimate grievances and both of them have audiences who are invested in their respective narratives. The timing really couldn't be worse for Tana's rebrand. She's been working so hard to establish herself as someone who's moved beyond drama and chaos, and now she's being forced to confront one of the most chaotic periods of her entire career. The temptation to respond in the old Tana way, with dramatic videos, emotional outbursts, and public confrontations, must be enormous. But giving into that temptation would prove Michael's point that she hasn't really changed. At the same time, staying completely silent allows Michael to shape the narrative without any pushback, which could be equally damaging to her reputation. She's basically being forced to choose between compromising her rebrand by engaging in drama or potentially letting that rebrand get destroyed by someone else's version of events.
This whole situation raises bigger questions about accountability, forgiveness, and second chances in the age of social media. Should Tana be allowed to move on from Tanacon and build a new reputation, or does she owe Michael some kind of acknowledgement or apology for how things played out? Should Michael be able to share his story and seek some kind of justice, or is this just stirring up old drama for personal gain? Is there a way for both of them to get what they need without destroying each other in the process? The answer probably depends on what each of them actually wants to achieve. If Tana genuinely wants to maintain her brand-safe era and focus on her growth, she might need to find a way to acknowledge Michael's experience without getting dragged back into the full drama. If Michael genuinely wants healing and accountability rather than revenge, he might need to focus more on his own recovery and less on Tana's success. But the cynic in me suspects that this is going to turn into a full-scale internet war because that's what generates the most engagement and attention for everyone involved. Michael gets to position himself as the wronged party finally getting justice, Tana gets to prove that she's moved beyond this kind of drama, and everyone else gets to pick sides and argue about who was really responsible for one of YouTube's biggest disasters. The really sad part is that 6 years later, we're still talking about an event that lasted one day and made everyone involved miserable. Tanacon was a failure for everyone. The fans who got heat stroke, Tana who got blamed, Michael who got scapegoated, and the entire influencer event industry that had to deal with the fallout. The fact that it's still generating drama and trauma half a decade later shows just how lasting the impact of internet controversies can be. What's going to be really interesting to watch is how Tana's audience responds to all this. Her current fan base includes a lot of people who discovered her through Canceled and might not even know the full Tanacon story. They've been supporting her rebrand and her growth, so having someone from her past show up with accusations of bad behavior could be jarring. At the same time, her longtime fans have been through multiple Tana controversies and might be more skeptical of Michael's motivations. Michael's challenge is that he's been out of the public eye for so long that he doesn't really have a dedicated fan base to support his version of events. He's essentially starting from scratch in terms of building credibility and sympathy while going up against someone who has millions of followers and years of experience managing her public image. That's a pretty significant disadvantage, even if his story is completely accurate. The broader influencer community is probably watching this situation very carefully because it touches on issues that affect everyone in the space. Questions about accountability, second chances, the long-term consequences of past mistakes, and the ethics of revisiting old drama are relevant to pretty much every content creator who's been online for more than a few years. There's also the business aspect to consider. Tana's rebrand isn't just about personal growth, it's about securing her financial future through legitimate brand partnerships and sustainable revenue streams. Having someone publicly question her character and accountability could genuinely threaten those opportunities. Brands don't want to be associated with ongoing drama or unresolved controversies, even if they happened years ago. Michael, on the other hand, seems to have less to lose financially and more to gain in terms of attention and potential opportunities. If he can successfully position himself as someone who was wronged and is now telling his truth, that could open doors for him in terms of content creation, speaking opportunities, or other ventures. There's definitely a market for redemption stories and insider perspectives on major internet events.
So here we are, 6 years after Tanacon, watching the aftermath play out in real time on social media. Michael has broken his silence, and he's clearly not planning to go quietly back into hiding. Tana is trying to maintain her brand-safe era while dealing with accusations that could undermine everything she's been working toward. And the rest of us get to watch this extremely messy situation unfold, probably in the most dramatic and public way possible. The real question is whether either of them can actually get what they want out of this situation. Can Michael find the healing and accountability he's seeking? Can Tana protect her rebrand while addressing the legitimate concerns being raised? Can they both move forward without completely destroying each other in the process? Based on how internet drama usually plays out, I'm not particularly optimistic, but maybe they'll surprise us. One thing's for sure, Tana's attempt to leave her chaotic past behind just got a lot more complicated. The ghosts of Tanacon have officially returned, and they don't seem interested in staying buried. Whether this destroys her rebrand or forces her to address unresolved issues in a way that actually helps her grow remains to be seen. But either way, it's going to be absolutely wild to watch. If you've made it this far into this absolute chaos, you clearly have excellent taste in drama content. So why not subscribe and join the thousands of other people who apparently enjoy watching influencer careers implode in real time? Because honestly, at this point, the Michael and Tana saga is just getting started, and something tells me we're going to need all the popcorn we can get for whatever comes next in this completely unhinged timeline we're all living in.